He thought his badge made him untouchable. For years, Detective Alan Briggs bullied innocent people, twisted the truth, and walked into courtrooms knowing no one could stop him. But one day he arrested the wrong woman. She wasn't just a victim. She was someone powerful, someone prepared, and someone who would bring his entire world crashing down. What happened next left the whole courtroom stunned and ended his career forever. From the very first day Detective Alan Briggs clipped that shiny badge to his chest, he felt like he had stepped into a world where no rules applied to him. To Alan, the badge wasn't just a symbol of duty, it was a shield, a weapon and a crown all rolled into one. It gave him authority, and in his mind, that authority made him untouchable. At first he carried himself like any officer should: sharp uniform, polished boots, the walk of a man who represented the law. But beneath that exterior, Alan wasn't motivated by justice. He was motivated by power, and little by little he learned how to bend the system to his will. Witnesses who dared to question him soon realized their words carried no weight against the authority of a man in uniform. If someone hesitated to cooperate, Alan had ways of making them comply, sometimes through intimidation, sometimes through threats, and sometimes through flat-out lies written neatly into his reports. He didn't see these as abuses. He saw them as tools of survival in a world where only the strong ruled. Soon, people in the community began to whisper his name not with respect, but with fear. Shopkeepers tensed when he entered their stores. Young men crossed the street to avoid him. Mothers told their children not to draw his attention. Alan noticed all of this, and instead of feeling shame, he smiled. Fear, after all, was just another kind of power. In the courtroom, his word was gold. Judges trusted him, juries believed him, and lawyers rarely questioned him. "My word against theirs," Alan would mutter to himself. "And who do you think the court will believe?" For years, that cynical mantra proved true. Case after case, he stood victorious, watching people's lives crumble while his reputation grew. He became bold, careless even. Each victory inflated his ego, convincing him that nothing and no one could ever bring him down. To Alan, the badge wasn't just a job. It was a license to dominate. He walked with the swagger of a man convinced he was above the law, untouchable in every way. But what Alan Briggs didn't know was that power has limits, and soon he would cross paths with someone who wasn't afraid of his badge. Someone who would expose the man behind the uniform and shatter the illusion of untouchable power he had built for himself. Alan's reputation spread quickly through the community, and it wasn't the kind of reputation any honorable officer would want. He wasn't remembered as the man who protected neighborhoods or helped children cross the street. No, Alan Briggs was remembered as the officer you hoped you never crossed paths with. To many, he was less a protector of the people and more a predator in uniform. He had a way of carrying himself that made people uneasy. The cold stare, the clipped tone, the heavy hand resting on his holster, it was all part of his performance. Alan didn't need to raise his voice to intimidate. His presence alone did the job, and if someone dared to push back, even slightly, he had a line he loved to deliver with a smirk. "My word against yours. Guess who the court will believe?" That phrase became his trademark weapon, sharper than any blade and heavier than any gun. Because deep down, everyone knew he was right. In a courtroom, a police officer's testimony carried weight. A single word from him could sink a defense, destroy a reputation, or ruin a life. He wielded that power recklessly, knowing most people couldn't afford to fight back. Parents warned their teenagers to stay out of his way. Small business owners learned not to argue when Alan made demands. Even defense attorneys whispered about him in frustration, recognizing how difficult it was to challenge his carefully constructed lies. He seemed to always be one step ahead, filing reports that matched his narrative, conveniently leaving out details that might expose the truth. And for years it worked. Alan built a career not on justice but on fear. Those who had the courage to complain quickly realized their voices were drowned out by his authority. The system, which was supposed to protect the innocent, seemed to shield him instead. The worst part was how confident Alan had become in his own invincibility. Each time he leaned on that smug phrase, "My word against yours," he grew bolder, more careless, more ruthless. And with every unjust victory, his sense of untouchable power only deepened. But Alan didn't realize something important. Fear may silence people temporarily, but it doesn't erase the truth. Eventually, truth finds a voice. And one day, Alan would face someone who refused to be silenced. Someone who would prove his badge wasn't as powerful as he believed. But one night, Alan made a mistake that would change everything. It was late evening. The kind of night where the streets were quiet and only a few stores were still open. Alan was patrolling, not because he wanted to protect anyone, but because he enjoyed having the night to himself. One more chance to remind people who held the power in their town. Outside a small local business, he spotted a woman exchanging words with a store clerk. Her name was Maya Carter. She wasn't shouting. She wasn't being aggressive. She was simply standing her ground, explaining calmly that she had been overcharged. To any normal person, it was nothing more than a simple disagreement, something that would have been resolved in minutes. But to Alan, it was an opportunity. He saw Maya's confidence, the way she refused to shrink or apologize, and it irritated him. Alan wasn't used to people, especially women, holding their ground around him. To him, strength was a challenge, and challenges had to be crushed. So instead of diffusing the situation, he escalated it. He stepped in, his badge glinting under the store's fluorescent lights, and immediately took control. "Ma'am," he said with that practiced tone of authority, "you're causing a disturbance." Maya blinked in surprise. "A disturbance? I was just asking for a refund." Her calm voice only fueled his ego. He wanted a reaction, wanted her to show fear, but she refused. That quiet strength unnerved him. And so, with the same arrogance he had used countless times before, Alan declared, "You're under arrest." Gasps filled the room as customers watched the scene unfold. Maya didn't resist. She didn't argue. She simply looked him straight in the eye, steady and unshaken, and said, "This is wrong. I'll see you in court." Those words struck Alan like a challenge, though he dismissed them at the time. To him, court was his playground. His word had always been enough. He believed this night would be no different, that Maya Carter would become just another name, added to his list of people silenced by his badge. What Alan didn't know was that Maya wasn't like the others. She wasn't afraid, she wasn't powerless, and her calmness was not weakness. It was the warning of a storm that was about to shatter his entire world. Most people would have broken under Alan's threats. Over the years, he had perfected the art of intimidation. His harsh tone, his piercing stare, and his constant reminder that his badge gave him the upper hand. Ordinary citizens usually folded quickly, either out of fear of jail time or simply the hopelessness of fighting against someone with so much authority. But Maya Carter was different. From the moment Alan slapped the cuffs on her wrists, he expected the usual routine: panic, tears, maybe even desperate begging. That was what gave him satisfaction. The moment people realized they were powerless against him. Yet Maya refused to give him that satisfaction. She didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even plead her innocence the way others did. Instead, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that made Alan uneasy. Inside the patrol car, she sat straight, her gaze fixed out the window, calm and unbothered. Alan kept glancing at her through the rearview mirror, waiting for the moment when fear would finally break through her composure. But it never came. The more silence stretched between them, the more unsettled he became. At the station, when he laid out his usual threats about charges and consequences, Maya looked him directly in the eye. Her voice was steady, controlled, almost unnervingly calm. "This is wrong," she said, "and I'll see you in court." Those 6 words landed heavier than any protest or outburst could have. Alan was so used to people shrinking under his power that he didn't know how to handle defiance delivered without fear. Her tone wasn't angry. It wasn't desperate. It was certain. And that certainty rattled him. For the first time in years, Alan felt something he hadn't felt before: doubt. He pushed it aside quickly, reminding himself that the courtroom was his domain. Judges trusted him, juries sided with him, and prosecutors rarely questioned his testimony. "Court won't save you," he thought smugly. Yet, deep down, a nagging unease began to take root. Maya's calm wasn't the reaction of someone helpless. It was the confidence of someone who knew more than she was revealing. And while Alan couldn't see it yet, those words, "I'll see you in court," were not a threat. They were a promise that his days of hiding behind his badge were numbered. On the day of the trial, Alan strutted into the courtroom like he owned the place. His shoes clicked against the polished floor with deliberate rhythm, each step radiating arrogance. He adjusted his tie, puffed out his chest, and carried the same smug confidence that had carried him. Through countless other hearings, Alan was in his element. Sliding into his chair, he leaned back casually, arms crossed over his chest, his badge polished to perfection and gleaming, proudly under the bright courtroom lights. He wanted everyone in the room to see it, to remember who he was. To Alan, the badge wasn't just authority. It was a shield that had always protected him from consequences. The prosecutor greeted him with a nod of familiarity, and Alan smirked. This was routine. Another case, another troublemaker to discredit, another victory built on lies. He didn't even see Maya Carter as a threat. In his mind, she was just another name, another file, another example of someone who would crumble once they realized how stacked the system was against them. But then Maya entered the courtroom, and instantly the atmosphere changed. She didn't walk in timidly, head down, the way most defendants did. No. Maya walked with a poise that turned heads. She was dressed in a sharp navy blue suit, her posture strong, her expression calm yet commanding. The jury noticed. The judge noticed. Even Alan's attorney shifted slightly, as if sensing that this case wasn't going to be routine after all. Alan's smirk faltered for the briefest second, though he quickly forced it back. Still, something about Maya's presence unsettled him. It wasn't defiance in the loud, rebellious sense. It was quiet strength. The kind of strength that didn't need to announce itself. As Maya took her seat at the defense table, she didn't glance at Alan with fear. Instead, she looked at him with a steady, unwavering gaze, as though she already knew how this story would end. For the first time in his career, Alan felt the balance of power in a courtroom shift, and it wasn't shifting in his favor. What he thought would be another easy win was already beginning to slip through his fingers, and deep down, he knew it. She wasn't just any defendant. From the moment Maya Carter walked through the courtroom doors, it was clear she carried herself differently than the countless others who had stood in that very spot. Most defendants shuffled in with nervous glances, shoulders slumped under the weight of fear. But not Maya. She walked with intention. Dressed in a sharp navy blue suit that seemed to sharpen her very presence, her head was held high and her stride was calm but powerful. Each step echoed with quiet confidence. And it didn't take long for the entire room to feel it. The jury, who had moments ago been glancing absently at their notepads, suddenly leaned forward. Their curiosity was caught, their focus redirected. Maya wasn't trembling. She wasn't defeated. She carried herself like someone who had already prepared for every angle, every question, every attempt to break her down. Even the judge, who had seen thousands of cases and hardened himself to emotional theatrics, lifted his eyes and paid attention. It wasn't just the suit. It wasn't just the calm. It was the unshakable sense of dignity that Maya radiated. She wasn't there to defend herself in desperation. She was there to stand up against injustice. Alan noticed too, though he tried to hide it. He sat a little straighter, arms still crossed, but his smug grin was weaker now, almost forced. He told himself she was just putting on a show, trying to look strong before the inevitable verdict crushed her. But a flicker of unease gnawed at him. Something about her presence unsettled him in a way he couldn't explain. Even Alan's own attorney, who usually treated defendants with casual dismissal, studied her for a moment longer than necessary. The way she carried herself didn't match Alan's story of an aggressive, disruptive woman. On the surface alone, Maya exuded control, grace, and intelligence, qualities that clashed with Alan's claims. There was no need for Maya to say a word. Her presence alone had already challenged the narrative Alan was so sure would win the day. Respect wasn't demanded. It was commanded naturally. And as the courtroom settled into silence, one unspoken truth became clear. This trial wasn't going to go the way Alan expected. Alan testified first, and as always, he did it with confidence. He leaned into the microphone, shoulders squared, voice steady, projecting the air of a man who had told this story 100 times before. To the jury, he appeared calm and professional, the very picture of authority. He described Maya as hostile, disrespectful, and uncooperative. He claimed she had raised her voice, disturbed the peace, and refused his commands. It was the same script he had used countless times in the past, and it had always worked. For a while, it seemed to be working again. A few jurors nodded slightly, taking notes. Alan even smirked at Maya across the courtroom, silently daring her to break under the weight of his words. He knew how convincing he could be. After all, why wouldn't they believe him? He was the officer. She was the accused. But then came the cross-examination. Maya's lawyer, a sharp and composed woman named Rachel, rose from her seat. She didn't rush. She didn't raise her voice. She approached Alan like a surgeon approaching an operation, calm, precise, and ready to cut exactly where it hurt. Her first few questions seemed harmless. The time of the incident, the location, the sequence of events. Alan answered smoothly, almost cockily, as if he were untouchable. But then Rachel began to dig deeper. "Detective Briggs," she asked, tilting her head slightly, "in your report, you mentioned the incident began outside the store, but isn't it true that the surveillance footage shows you first approached Miss Carter inside the store?" Alan's jaw tightened. I may have entered briefly," he said, shifting in his chair. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Rachel pressed on. Each question was a trap, and Alan walked right into them. She exposed gaps in his timeline, contradictions between his testimony and his written report, and outright lies that clashed with the store's security footage. With every answer, his once steady voice grew weaker. The jury leaned forward, no longer nodding along but scrutinizing him. Alan's badge, once his strongest weapon, couldn't shield him from facts. By the time Rachel was done, Alan's confident story looked less like testimony and more like a house of cards. One that was collapsing piece by piece in front of everyone. Then it was Maya's turn. Slowly, she rose from her seat, adjusting the sleeve of her navy blue suit with calm precision. There was no tremble in her hands, no hesitation in her steps as she walked to the witness stand. She didn't avoid eye contact with the jury. Instead, she met their eyes with quiet confidence, as though she was speaking directly to each one of them. When she began to speak, her voice was steady and clear. No theatrics, no exaggerated emotion, just calm strength. She started from the very beginning, explaining exactly where she was that night, what she was doing, and how Alan Briggs had approached her without cause. Every detail was delivered with precision, painting a picture that felt honest and real. Unlike Alan's testimony, Maya's story didn't waver. It didn't rely on authority. It relied on truth. She described how she had simply asked the store clerk for a refund, how Alan had escalated the situation unnecessarily, and how he had twisted her calm disagreement into accusations of aggression. And then she revealed what Alan hadn't expected, the evidence. First, her lawyer played the security camera footage from the store. The grainy video filled the courtroom screen, showing Maya standing calmly at the counter, her voice steady and respectful. In the corner of the frame, Alan appeared, his posture already domineering, his tone sharp as he accused her of being disruptive. The jury leaned forward. The difference between Alan's story and the truth was already obvious. Then came the witnesses. Several customers who had been in the store that night took the stand, each confirming Maya's version of events. They described how she had remained calm while Alan had grown more aggressive, how she never raised her voice, never resisted. And finally, Maya's lawyer revealed the strongest piece of evidence, a recording. Maya, anticipating trouble, had discreetly recorded the moment Alan threatened her in the patrol car. The courtroom went silent as Alan's voice echoed through the speakers. "My word against yours. Guess who the court will believe?" That single sentence hit harder than anything else. It stripped away the mask of professionalism Alan had tried to wear and exposed the truth of who he really was. By the time Maya finished her testimony, the courtroom wasn't just listening, they were convinced. The courtroom buzzed. Whispers rippled through the gallery like a wave, people leaning toward one another with wide eyes and hushed voices. The jury, who had once sat politely detached, now looked fully engaged, pens hovering over notepads, eyes flicking between Maya and Alan. Some jurors shook their heads in disbelief. Others leaned forward with narrowed eyes, as if piecing together a puzzle that suddenly made sense. At the bench, the judge's brow furrowed deeply. He wasn't a man easily rattled, but the evidence, the video, the witnesses, and that damning recording was impossible to ignore. For years he had presided over Alan's cases, trusting the detective's word as reliable. But now he saw cracks where there once seemed to be stone. And then there was Alan. For the first time in his career, the mask slipped. His usual confident smirk was gone. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, tugging at the collar of his shirt as though it had suddenly grown too tight. His eyes darted toward the jury, searching desperately for any sign of sympathy, but he found none. Where once he had commanded respect with nothing but a badge and a stare, now all he saw staring back at him was suspicion. He crossed his arms tightly, then uncrossed them. His fingers tapped restlessly against the table. Beads of sweat formed along his temple despite the coolness of the room. The power he had always relied on, his badge, his reputation, his word, felt like sand slipping through his fingers. The gallery could feel it too. You could almost taste the shift in the air. For years, people had whispered about Alan's arrogance, his abuse of authority, his heavy-handed tactics, but whispers were never enough. In this moment, though, with the truth laid bare, the whispers grew louder, swelling into a collective realization. Alan Briggs was not untouchable. As Maya sat calmly at the defense table, her composure only highlighted his unraveling. She didn't need to gloat, didn't need to say a word. Her silence was louder than any outburst could have been. And deep down, Alan finally understood the truth. His badge couldn't protect him anymore. Not from evidence, not from witnesses, not from justice. Maya revealed something else that stunned the room. She wasn't just a random woman, caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. No, she was a civil rights attorney. The moment those words left her lips, the entire courtroom shifted once again. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Jurors exchanged quick glances, some even raising their eyebrows in surprise. The judge leaned forward slightly, studying her with newfound respect. Even Alan's own attorney blinked in disbelief, clearly realizing the case was far more dangerous than either of them had imagined. Maya explained that she had spent years on the front lines of justice, defending those who had been silenced, wronged or abused by the very system that was supposed to protect them. She spoke of cases where citizens had been intimidated, threatened, or unfairly treated by officers, who thought their authority made them immune to consequences. Her voice carried not anger but conviction. It wasn't rehearsed, it was lived experience. And now here she was, fighting her own battle, standing in the very position of the people she had defended countless times before. Only this time she wasn't just an attorney, she was both lawyer and victim, advocate and defendant. The irony was not lost on the jury nor on the crowd watching. Alan's confidence cracked even further. He had thought Maya was an easy target, just another civilian he could intimidate into silence. But learning that she was a seasoned civil rights attorney changed everything. She wasn't someone unfamiliar with the system. She knew it inside and out. She knew the rules, the loopholes, and most importantly, the ways men like Alan abused them. The realization hit Alan like a punch. He hadn't just arrested the wrong woman. He had arrested the worst possible woman to target. Someone who not only had the courage to stand against him, but also the knowledge, skill, and platform to dismantle him piece by piece. And the best part? She wasn't fighting this case in secret. Every word, every revelation, every shred of evidence was unfolding in a courtroom packed with witnesses. Alan wasn't just on trial in front of a judge. He was on trial in front of the community. He had spent years intimidating. As Maya laid out the evidence, Alan's entire career began to unravel, thread by thread. What had once seemed like an impenetrable wall of authority was now crumbling before everyone's eyes. The store footage, the witnesses, and the recording had opened the first cracks. But Maya didn't stop there. She had more. She introduced documentation of past complaints that had mysteriously gone unresolved. Citizens who had once been too afraid to speak suddenly found the courage to step forward. Inspired by Maya's bravery, they began sharing their own experiences. One man described how Alan had pulled him over late at night for no reason, only to fabricate charges when he questioned the stop. A young woman recounted how Alan had threatened her with jail time unless she signed a false statement. An elderly shop owner revealed how Alan had demanded favors in exchange for protection. Each story struck like a hammer, pounding away at the false image of integrity Alan had carefully built over the years. The jury listened intently, their expressions hardening with every testimony. What had started as a single case against Maya was now exposing a pattern of corruption that stretched far beyond her incident. This wasn't just about one wrongful arrest anymore. It was about years of abuse hiding behind a badge. Alan's attorneys scrambled, objecting whenever possible, but the damage was done. The more he tried to silence the witnesses, the more obvious the truth became. Alan Briggs was not a protector of the community. He was a predator shielded by his position. And Alan himself? He sat there visibly shrinking. His once cocky posture slumped lower with every passing minute. His face, once smug and composed, grew pale. The courtroom he had once controlled now felt like a cage, and everyone inside was watching his downfall in real time. By the time the final witness stepped down, the picture was undeniable. Alan Briggs wasn't untouchable. He wasn't even credible. He was a man who had built his career on lies, intimidation, and power games, and now the mask had been ripped away. For years he had silenced others. But in this courtroom, their voices finally united to silence him. The judge's gavel came down hard, the sharp crack echoing through the courtroom like thunder. The room froze for a split second, the weight of the decision hanging heavy in the air. Then the words followed, clear, firm, undeniable. Maya Carter is cleared of all charges. A wave of relief washed over the defense table. Maya sat tall, her expression calm, but her eyes glimmering with quiet triumph. She hadn't just defended herself, she had proven the truth, exposed the lies, and turned the courtroom into a stage where justice finally stood tall. But the hammer didn't stop there. The judge's gaze shifted toward Alan Briggs, his voice carrying the authority of final judgment. Given the evidence presented, this court recommends an immediate investigation into Detective Briggs's conduct. The words struck harder than any sentence Maya could have hoped for. Alan's face drained of color. For years, he had strutted through courtrooms, certain of victory, untouchable in his authority. Now the same walls that once echoed his lies were echoing his downfall. His career, the reputation he clung to, the power he abused. All of it was slipping away with the judge's order. The gallery erupted, not in chaos but in relief. People whispered, nodded, even smiled. It wasn't celebration in the loud, raucous sense. It was quieter, deeper. It was the sound of justice finally being served after years of silence. Citizens who had once feared speaking out felt vindicated, their faith in the system cautiously reignited by the courage of one woman who refused to back down. The jury members exchanged glances, their expressions showing satisfaction that their verdict had mattered. The judge's gavel hadn't just cleared Maya, it had restored balance, at least for a moment, in a place where corruption had too often outweighed truth. Alan slumped in his chair, staring blankly ahead. The badge that once made him feel invincible now felt heavy, meaningless. He had thought it would shield him forever. Instead, it had become the very symbol of his undoing. For once, the law had worked the way it was meant to. Justice had not just been spoken, it had been delivered. Alan once believed his badge made him powerful. For years, he walked with his chest out and his head high, convinced that the symbol pinned to his uniform gave him the right to bend the world to his will. To him, it wasn't just a badge, it was armor, a weapon, and a shield against accountability. He thought it placed him above ordinary people, above the truth, even above the law. But in the end, it wasn't his badge that carried the most weight. It wasn't intimidation, fear, or false authority that held the real power in that courtroom. It was Maya. It was her truth, her courage, and her unshakable determination to stand tall when most would have crumbled. She wasn't armed with weapons or authority. She didn't need to raise her voice or threaten anyone. What she had was far greater, integrity. And integrity, when brought into the light, is unstoppable. The courtroom proved something that day, a truth that echoed louder than Alan's gavel-pounding arrogance ever could. No badge, no uniform, no lies, and no abuse of power can stand against the strength of justice when people are brave enough to fight for it. Alan's downfall was a warning. Authority without accountability is fragile. Power built on fear is temporary. But Maya's victory was a reminder of something far stronger, that justice, though sometimes delayed, cannot be silenced forever. It only takes one voice, spoken with courage, to spark others into rising. For the citizens watching, for the victims who finally stepped forward, And for everyone who had felt small in the face of corruption, Maya's stand was more than a personal win. It was hope, proof that even the mighty can fall, and even the quietest voices can be heard when they speak the truth. Alan lost his career. Maya walked out free, her head held higher than ever. But the lesson that lingered was bigger than both of them. Power is fleeting. Truth endures. And in that courtroom, justice proved it still has a voice. And that's how one woman's courage brought down a man who thought he was above the law. If you enjoyed this story and want more powerful tales like this, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the bell icon so you never miss the next one. Your support helps us share more stories that inspire, shock, and keep you hooked until the very end. See you in the next video.